afternoon or good evening from Berlin. This time I am Vedran Džihić from the Austrian Institute of International Affairs. I'm going to moderate today's webinar on Serbia, titled Understanding the March 15th Protest and State Repression in Serbia. As I'm in Berlin today, and the Germans used to be on time, we will be starting, and I guess a few other people are going to join. Before I make a short introduction, one or two sentences, and introduce the panel, I would just like to say two words on the technical aspects of our discussion. So I would first of all ask all of you that are not speaking to switch off the cameras, just to have the panelists with cameras switched on, so that we, dependently of which kind of Zoom setting you use, that we can see them on the screen as they speak and as they discuss. And secondly, I want to say that we will be having a Q&A session, so you can post your questions to the chat, but at the same time, also, let's see how it works if we also open up for some interventions and short questions from your side. As I said, the title is Understanding the March 15 Protest and State Repression in Serbia. The first point is that we are not for the first time facing violence and state repression in Serbia. Also, the protests are not happening for the first time. But what is unique, first of all, when it comes to the protests, of course, that this time the protests are led mostly by students, by young people. And secondly, that the solidarity and the sheer size of the protest is simply telling us that this is something new, something different. On March 15th, 2025, we saw hundreds of thousands, several hundred thousand people on the streets of Belgrade. We saw a use of something that we don't know what it is, but it seems to be a sonic weapon which was used by someone. Regime is and government is neglecting the use. So we have this momentum, and this is also a kind of a new, actually totally new quality, or in a negative sense, of what's happening in Serbia. In any case, we want to dig deeper, first of all, into the protests on the 15th, what happened, and what's actually the government and the regime doing, and how is it increasing repression. We want to look into different segments of repression and give a kind of a background to the situation right now. We also want to raise awareness on what's going on in Serbia, of course, because this is one of the major protests happening right now in Europe. Serbian protesters have been recently joined by the Turkish protesters protesting against a good friend of Alexander Vučić, Tayyip Erdogan. In any case, we have four panelists, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, give them the floor for the first round of interventions. First of all, we have Marko Mezić from the Center for Southeast European Studies in Graz, which is co-organizing this event together with the Austrian Institute of International Affairs. Marko is going to give us an insight on the core grievances driving the protests, putting the rule of law, corruption, and student demands into a context. Next to Marko, we have Jelena Kleot, Associate Professor of Media Studies from the Faculty of Philosophy in Novi Sad. And as you know, the protests were triggered by the collapse of the roof construction at the railway station in Novi Sad. And Jelena is going to focus on state repression and counter narratives, actually how the regime is targeting activists and independent journalists. We have, that's something specific for today's webinar. We have two Jelenas. And second Jelena is Jelena Lončar from Belgrade, Faculty of Political Sciences. She will be focusing on academia and education system, and the question, or the momentum that we have, that repression is increasingly used against schools and universities in whole Serbia. And last but not least, from the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory of the University of Belgrade, we have Luka Glušac. He is going to give us an overview of this cascade of escalation of violence and the legal actions of the government, of the regime. So we round up this first kind of a set of inputs. Then I'm going to pose one or two probably additional questions, and then we can open up for the Q&A. We aim, as you all know, I mean, Zoom will probably not allow us to go for hours, even if we could probably, and because this is an interesting and an important topic. We will try to be crispy, under quotation marks, and to focus on the most important details, but we are not going to stop the discussion if there are interesting and many questions from your side. So, but we aim at an hour 50 so that you just can plan your time ahead this evening. So, that's from my side. Marco, I would like to hand over, I mean, there is no table, but hand over Zoom to you, to Graz, for your first input.
Thank you, Vedran. So my task is to lay the groundwork for our discussion and to focus on issues related to the rule of law while also addressing the demands raised by students. But first, I would like to remind you all that there is no universally accepted definition of the term rule of law. It can mean many different things in different political and legal contexts. And for this reason, I often like to, especially when discussing with students, compare the rule of law to air. And just as air is invisible, we cannot always see the rule of law, but our society depends on it to function, same as with the air. And while we may not always feel the air, we notice when it is absent because we struggle to breathe. And the same is the true for the rule of law. Now, this very simple metaphor of being unable to breathe completely does capture the public sentiment in Serbia following the tragic events causing deaths of 16 people in an infrastructure collapse in Novi Sad train station on November 1st last year. And this train station tragedy marked a political turning point in Serbia in a way. It revealed the extent of state capture, exposed government corruption through the neglect of public procurement in costly infrastructures projects, and favoring of clientelistic companies awarded non-transparent lucrative contracts. The tragedy also highlighted the lack of integrity in independent state institutions, which are increasingly staffed by party loyalists, and initial efforts to control the political damage following the tragedy in Novi Sad through media cover-ups of the incident underscored the issue of media capture in Serbia. At the same time, delays in criminal proceedings against politicians implicated in the tragedy fueled accusations of political interference and corruption. So in essence, the Novi Sad disaster became a flashpoint for widespread dissatisfaction with Serbia's political system as a whole. And of course, observed problems with regard to the rule of law in Serbia are not new. They did not start in Novi Sad, of course. According to recent assessments of democratic trends, the country is no longer considered democratic. It has been downgraded to an electoral autocracy. So this Serbia's shift towards autocracy has resulted in the erosion of civil liberties, the rights of political opponents, and the freedom of the expression, including media freedom. To top that, over the last 13 years of Serbian progressive party rule, elections have been casted by irregularities, leaving no realistic opportunity for the opposition to gain power through democratic means. State-run media did serve as a mouthpiece to the ruling party. The police and intelligence services target civil society organizations unlawfully. And President Vučić himself is persistently overreaching presidential authorities by intervening both unconstitutionally and authoritarianly in all aspects of governance and daily life. So briefly, this is the context in which the March 15 protest took place in Belgrade. And we all know it was the biggest protest Serbia has ever seen. I would dare saying the region of Southeastern Europe has ever seen. It has led to internal delegitimization of the regime. But instead of actually catching up on this and trying to calm the tensions and meet some student demands, the state has decided to broaden the confrontation and to increase the level of oppression. I will elaborate briefly, but we will hear more from other speakers. So school teachers were the first to be punished for their support to protest by being deprived of their salaries. University professors, my colleagues and also dear friends, were the next targets of Vučić's regime. Media are broiling with instances of people losing their job over their support to protests. President Vučić has announced that in accordance with his own assessment, he would now openly influence the composition of the state prosecutorial bodies. And meanwhile, masked private security guards are safeguarding municipality buildings throughout Serbia, often violently obstructing even the elected deputies' right to exercise political participation. So given all this, given this authoritarian trend, the question is really, should we be talking about the rule of law, the lacking rule of law in Serbia, or something rather other than this? Let me explain. The arrests carried out by masked and unidentified men after the initial protest held in Novi Sad truly reminded me of Augusto Pinochet-like state terror. And the sonic weapon attack on peaceful protesters also bears the unmistakable mark of state terror. Now, although the government tried to deny the incident, claiming it does not own the sound cannon, there are over 3,000 testimonies. There are hundreds of video recordings documenting the use of weapon that is officially illegal in the Republic of Serbia. So if it was not a sound cannon, independent investigation should actually find out what it was and who used it against peaceful citizens. So, and also I would like to add that very prominent high-ranking members of Vučić party have publicly celebrated the use of what they refer to as the sound cannon in live broadcast on Informer TV. So no other frame, no other reference can adequately explain such an unprovoked act of violence except state terror. The absence of actual bloodshed and victims does not diminish the significance of this event. And to top this, the attack has occurred just next to an improvised camp, next to the building of the presidency of the president of Republic of Serbia. So next to a camp which was housing paramilitary formations made up of convicted criminals and disbanded unit for special operation veterans. Let me remind you, hands of the members of this unit are stained with the blood of innocent civilians from the former Yugoslavia during the 1990s violent conflicts in this region. Some of its members are legally convicted for political assassinations of the former president of Socialist Republic of of Serbia, Ivan Stambolic, and first democratically elected Prime Minister of Serbia, Dr. Zoran Đinđić. And given all this, the connection to state terror becomes inescapable. So what is it at stake here for those protesting in Serbia today? I'm often asked about the substance and the essence of these protests. And under this pretext, this is not a question of simply political choice. It is not just simply about the rule of law. I don't think it's even about European values, because Vučić today very much epitomizes European values. Serbian citizens have been reduced by their own government to struggle for the most basic human right, the right to life and the right to security. The right to life is where it all began with 5 months ago in Novi Sad. In Serbia, it seems that it's not the corruption that kills, the state kills. It is the captured state as the epicenter of organized crime. So now I can finally come back to the 4 demands raised by Serbian students. Rather than going into all of them individually, I would like to really sum them up as one fundamental outcry. And this would be the demand that no one should be allowed to kill or steal and without facing any legal consequences. This is very fundamental, very direct, and very simple demand to which I believe all of us can subscribe. But unfortunately, it is a demand that is not so easily achieved in today's increasingly liberal world. From Moscow to California, from Ankara to Budapest. And let me stop here with this initial intervention and allow me to conclude on a bit of a positive note, because it is in my nature to be hopelessly positive at all times. So I do not know whether the protest will actually give rise to a political force that can democratically replace the Vučić system and answer student demands. Because this depends on the role of other political subjects, both within and outside of Serbia. But I do know with absolute certainty that 5 months of protests have mobilized an entire generation of young people. They have learned to organize themselves, to define their political demands, and to communicate them effectively. They have also managed to break the code of state oppression, empowering democratically oriented citizens to overcome their fears. They have become responsible citizens. And Serbia, it seems to me, can place their hopes in its youth. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Marko. I mean, thanks a lot for being hopelessly positive, but also realist at the same time. I think we're going to come back to some of the questions that you raised, but thank you for setting the stage, also reminding us of the turbulent and very dynamic international environment where the protests are happening. So I think there is a lot to say here. We can pick it up probably later on in the Q&A session. So we have our 2 Jelenas. I would like first to invite Jelena K from Novi Sad to tell us more on the topic of the repression against journalists and independent media. So Jelena, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It will be actually a toolkit for repression against every vocal citizen, because with the tools of digital media, I think many of our fellow citizens have become reporters and playing a really important role in the happenings in Serbia. When we speak about the state repression, I would say that for the most part, the methods that we are seeing, they are not novel. We have seen them in the past years. There is, however, a change that they are more forceful and more frequent. And this is what has changed when the roof of a train station in Novi Sad fell, and the citizens, especially young people and students, started organizing first actions as a way of protesting against the corruption that has led to the tragedy in Novi Sad. So when we speak about those different tools that have become more forceful and more frequent, we have seen that different kinds of harassment are being put in place, and this includes, I would say, all vocal voices, citizens, and media included, and they range from administrative harassment, which we have seen in the past month or so, when the offices of 4 non-profit organizations were raided, and in one of them, for example, in Crta, 18 police officers stayed for 28 hours examining their documents. So we basically had similar cases of state harassment, but not at the scope that we witnessed at that time. What we see more frequently being employed are police and judiciary and prosecution and secret services as means of sending the message, but also intimidating students and activists. And I think it was a telling sign when on the first protest that was organized at the railway station in Novi Sad. It was being organized by two activist groups, Sviće and Stav, and when they came early enough to set up the stage for the protest, one of their members has been captured by police and taken for a police interview without any valid explanation of the reasons why he's being captured, other than staging a protest. And at that time, it wasn't clear, but now with all the reports from different organizations related to digital safety, these interviews have additional value for the police, because when people are held for police interviews, they usually are asked to leave their phones on the table. And that was used by the police to install different wiretapping software. So through the course of the protests, we have learned cases of numerous activists, many of them engaged in protests against corruption that led to the tragedy in Novi Sad. So we have learned about many instances of these wiretapping schemes. And then lastly, I would say that there is a group of activists from Novi Sad, six of them are currently imprisoned under the charges of forceful act against constitutional order, and they are basically being held on the basis of the footage that was made in the offices of a political party, and we are currently in the situation that 10 days after their arrest, we still don't have an available transcript of the prosecution order to wiretap the offices. But what we do have, and this brings me to the media, we do have a screening of those conversations that were held in the offices of a political party. We had those images as part of the campaign that was led on pro-regime television stations, and later on it spilled over to the tabloids. So Marco is very right when he's saying that media is captured, and I would say that one resource that the government has at its disposal for harassing journalists, citizens, and activists alike are very intensive smear campaigns that are being led primarily by 4 TV stations that have obtained a license for broadcasting on the level of the whole country, or as we frequently say, they have national licenses, but later the narratives are being propagated by the tabloid media. And what we see in terms of the narrative that is being created by the ruling party is that they are constructing an image which in many ways resembles the double speak. So it's a double reality and misportrayal of the student protest and the citizens who are supporting them. So one of the frequent narratives is the one on violence. So even though students on numerous occasions have shown that they are not violent, insisted on every protest being peaceful, this is still being propagated as one of the most frequent narratives, and this is that there is an attempt of violent coup against the regime. Then the second one is that the ones who are protesting are some sort of minority, whereas the support for the ruling party is much larger. I think that this kind of narrative is slowly losing ground even among the supporters of the ruling party, witnessing all the images, not the least from the protest in Belgrade on the 15th of March, but that was also important turning point. And then lastly, and I would say most dangerously, there is a narrative of inauthenticity, which basically claims that none of the happenings in Serbia are organically led by students who demand justice, but rather that they are instigated from abroad, from foreign forces, and then the whole kind of regional story comes into focus, bringing us also partly back in the 90s, where old enemies are now resurfacing again. So it's either Croatian Secret Service that is organizing students in Serbia, or it's Kosovo Prime Minister who is in touch with protesters in Serbia. And this narrative is also a toolbox that we have seen before, and this is the creation of, enemy within that is linked with the enemy across the border. So it's being repeated not only on the press conferences of the key party representatives of the ruling party, but also through special TV shows, evening interviews, morning programs. So this is being forcefully put in front of the part of the audience in Serbia. So to conclude, I think that this repressive toolkit is basically there to be intimidation, and there is only one thing that the government is currently refraining to do, and that is to allow armed police to act forcefully against protesters. It does happen occasionally, but you can see that there is an order for them to refrain. More covert actions of repression are more present and more forceful and frequent. So sorry if I took too much of a time.
No, that's perfectly fine. Thank you so much, Jelena. If any secret services are listening to our conversation, you never know. At least the Croatian Secret Service would now be totally proud, so that they are the most potent ones, so they can incite revolutions perfectly. For the Croats, at least, something positive. No, I'm kidding. On a serious side, when you also reminded us of the doublespeak, I mean, this is George Orwell's 1984, and there is in George Orwell's novel. There is also this momentum of not only double speak but also double think. So when there is a system of indoctrination, actually, in which subjects are expected to believe in two contradicting truths. So when Vučić on one hand side claims I'm gonna go and smash you, and spreads the narrative of violence, and at the same time steps up and go to the TV stations on a daily basis and claiming that he is the one fighting for peace and stability and for peaceful Serbia. So this is this kind of double speak, and at the same time also double think. Thank you so much, Jelena. Now we go to our second Jelena, who is sitting in Belgrade, Jelena Lončar, to give us a bit of an insight into the academic repression, or the academia repression on the schools and the teachers, which has deepened over the course of the last few days, actually.
Yes, thank you, Vedran, thank you for the invitation. So I will speak first about the schools, the primary and secondary education, and shift to repression against universities, and present very similar things to what Jelena and Marko already spoke about. When it comes to schools, it's hard to say exactly how many schools are in strike now. And the data published by the government and the Association of Schools differ very much. And that's part of this campaign of trying to present an image and misportray what's actually going on. Estimates suggest that around 70% of schools have at least partially participated in strikes and protests. Now, some schools still operate normally. Others shorten their classes from 45 minutes to 30 minutes. Some schools completely shut down their classes. In some schools, some teachers are in strike, others teach normally. In others, parents don't send their kids to schools in an effort to support the protests and strikes. In some high schools also, high school graduates decided to occupy their schools in the same way as the students block their faculties. There are cities, for example, in Western Serbia, where there are no classes at all in any of the primary and secondary education. Now, I think it's important to say that teachers' dissatisfaction predates these current student protests, but has certainly gained momentum alongside these current protests. And the teachers' demands include the support for the student demands, but also reflect their own dissatisfaction related to the quality of education, available resources, administrative burdens, low wages, insufficient autonomy of schools, etc. So we focus now on the state repression, how the state reacts to these protests. The protests started already in December, and the first reaction was that the fall term ended a week earlier in December to preempt the protest. And basically, if there's no school, there won't be any protest. So that was the logic, and that's why the school was closed a week earlier. Then when the spring term started at the end of January, the government threatened that the salaries will be cut. And in February, teachers did not get the salary for January. In some schools, they received some percent, but 30%, in others 10%, in others 5%, in some schools nothing. In some schools, even teachers who did not participate in strike did not receive salaries. I think it's important to know that this was done illegally, without implementing appropriate legal procedures and respecting the right to a legal remedy. In order to reduce a teacher's salary, a disciplinary procedure first has to be carried out, and this did not happen. The third strategy was a constant one from the beginning, basically, and that's intimidation. Teachers and parents who support the teachers and their strike face threats, surveillance of their meetings. So when they meet, parents' councils, teachers, when they meet, and their school principals are not present, then these meetings are surveilled and recorded and then sent to the municipality and politicians so that they can not only be aware, but know who they should intimidate or threaten. There's a very strong smear campaign against the teachers. There's mobbing at work by the school principals. Teachers keep receiving threatening phone calls. Tabloids close to the regime target them, revealing private information about them and their families. There are constant threats that they would lose their jobs. And since parents also support them, some of them also face pressure. Recently, we've seen an increased repression, as Vedran, you also announced. This week, we see it particularly in schools which are blocked by the students or the high school students. It's mostly bringing unidentified individuals to schools for secret meetings, and also then increasing security threats for the students who are spending their time in the schools. Blocking schools with students inside, for instance, as happened yesterday. So these were some of the examples of repression against the teachers. It is increasingly challenging to continue with the strike in these circumstances, particularly because it's now more than a month that teachers have not received salaries, although there is solidarity and support for the teachers that comes from other parts of the society. But it seems that solidarity among the teachers is also on a high level, and they remain resolute to continue with the strike. They have just ended the blocking of one of the bridges, like 3-hour blocking of the bridges in Belgrade. When it comes to university, I think the strategy was a bit different. While it was constantly repressive against the teachers, I'd say it was slightly different with the universities due to the massive public support for the students, and the university being one of the few institutions in which citizens have trust. Now, initially, the regime was trying to convince the public that the demands were met, and that's something that keeps being portrayed in the media, and that the student demands are met, even when it was clear to everyone that demands were not met, and when the government revealed additional documents, okay, now we actually met the demands. It's still a narrative that the demands are met. And then the government basically used the tactic of attrition, the same tactic that was used in previous protests, hoping that they would eventually end. Now, when they realized that the support is increasing and that this would not end as previous protests did, the tactic was a combination of stick and carrot. The carrot was increase of salaries for the university professors, combined with the stick, which is a smear campaign in the tabloids. And once this strategy failed, the regime started using more repressive methods, threatening students they would lose the year, filing criminal charges against the Belgrade rector, lynching him in the media, and finally cutting the salaries. I would like to give a few examples of these different tactics. One of the tactics I did not mention so far was the creation of the organization called Students 2.0. It's a government-aligned group of very few students promoted on state media with the aim to show that there are students who want to study compared to those students who protest, and apparently, as it is framed, they do not want to study. This organization is composed of very few, 5 or 6 students at most, but it's very visible in state-controlled media, presenting itself as a representative of the majority of students. They pushed criminal charges against the Belgrade rector for allegedly obstructing education. So far, the rector has heard about this only in the media. Now, the goal of this is certainly introducing divisions and distrust, questioning student support in the public as well, and of course, collapsing of higher education is one of the consequences. Then I mentioned that the carrot thing, the financial incentives. The regime tried silencing the protest with financial incentives for the professors. The salaries were increased which was part of the 4th student demand. So this demand was met with the passing of the new higher education law 3 weeks ago. And the regime was hoping that the universities would give up on the other demands. However, universities insisted that key demands remain unfulfilled, and working groups formed by the universities, which were there to go through all the documentations and provide conclusion of whether and in which % the demands were met. They released an 80 pages document demonstrating that the demands, particularly the first one, have not been met, and exposing the missing documentation still. And this then led us to a new repression phase and stronger institutional pressure against the professors. The rector of the Belgrade University, who is very strongly supporting the students, became a primary target of state propaganda alongside several professors. The most vocal students are also slandered. Their medical documentation published in the media, targeted as enemies of the state. We keep seeing now this is new. And such campaign increased particularly after March 15. A few days ago, 9 professors found their car tires punctured. All the faculties have received letters from the Ministry of Education in a technical mandate because the government resigned, with several requests. The deans were asked to inform the ministry whether they called the police to evict the students blocking the faculties, whether they conducted disciplinary proceedings against the students who are occupying the buildings, and also the proceedings against professors who do not teach. The Minister of Education is threatening the deans and institutions of higher education with fines and proceedings in case all of these requests are not met, so the measures were not taken. All the faculties, however, agree that there's no legal basis for the police intervention because the students are not committing criminal acts. They're not in any way endangering public order and peace, and certainly faculty premises are not private property from which students can or should be expelled. The culmination was a decision to withhold the second part of the February salaries from higher education. This affected not only the faculty, but also the administrative workers whose work was not affected by the blockades. And then universities responded with a warning that this decision is not legal because the universities did not suspend their work. Professors keep performing all other activities beyond teaching, such as research, and the decision not to teach was certainly not theirs. In response, then, the Ministry of Education made a new decision saying, okay, we will pay part of the salary related to the scientific work, the research, but not teaching, and then adopted a new regulation stating that, okay, the faculty duties cover 85% of teaching and 15% of research instead of previous 50-50 division, which basically means that the professors will receive only 12.5% of their full salaries. So that's what we can expect. And I think it's important to say that there are at least two problems with this decision, and I'm ending with this. It's illegal because the government in resignation, a technical mandate, cannot pass such regulations, and it was not passed in accordance with the required procedures, which require consultation before the regulation being passed with the National Council for Higher Education and the Conference of Universities of Serbia, which certainly did not happen. The universities will certainly reply to all of this with the lawsuits, but we know the justice is very selective in Serbia. And what we have seen so far, that the state institutions are efficient only against the protesters and not those on the side of the regime. So I'd end with this, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jelena. I mean, in the meantime, the Western media, also Austrian German media, are reporting a bit more intensively about the protests, but this kind of a very detailed insights into the dynamics of what's happening on a daily basis, how the regime is trying, to change or to intensively use the carrots, going illegally, etc., etc. This is not really known in at least in the Western media. So thank you so much for telling us more details about this type of a repression. And last but not least, we go to Luka Glushac. Luka, the question will be once again to tell us more about the escalation of violence and again, like Jelena just did in terms of education, put a focus a bit on the illegal actions of the government, look closer into this kind of illegal momentum. Yeah.
Hvala puno, Vedrane. So yeah, I'll try to briefly present the evolution of violence during the ongoing protests in Serbia. At the very outset, it should be underlined that the students' protests have been peaceful and that students have been doing everything they can to keep them as such. However, opponents of the protests have had different ideas, and we can, differentiate between three temporal phases of the protests and associated acts of violence manifested in those in those phases. So we have first sporadic incidents on the streets during the daily commemorations for the victims of Novi Sad tragedy. We have the establishment of so-called Chatsilen that was mentioned by Marko, and then the repression during the protest of the 15th of March in Belgrade. However, in all these three phases, we can identify instances of violence, and not just spontaneous or situational violence, but also organized sources of violence as well. There are at least three different forms of organized violence during the protest, which we can be labeled as a ruling party sanctioned violence, a state-sponsored violence, and a state violence. Obviously, these three sources are not independent completely of each other. In fact, they often work in parallel or in unison. The ruling party sanctioned violence and the state-sponsored violence also share their agents, which are essentially rented thugs. The difference between them is in the nature of the principle, if we use the principal-agent framework. In the former, the principle is the ruling party, while in the latter, the principle is made of the captured parts of the formal institutions, so the security sector. The third type, the state violence, is the use, obviously, of the regular state security and police forces during public assemblies. And then, as mentioned by Jelena Kleut, it should be said that this most usual and transparent use of force by police has been quite limited at the expense of these more covert use of violence by the first two sources. The first phase of the protest was marked by sporadic but still very serious incidents of violence, most notably car ramming attacks against the peaceful protesters, causing severe injuries of several students. These daily commemoration assemblies at 11:52 every day have been marked by verbal but sometimes also physical attacks by members, supporters, and sympathizers of the ruling party or of the ruling coalition. And we know this because these protests have brought a new feature, I would say. The peaceful protesters are doing an excellent job in taking pictures and videos of these perpetrators in the real time, sharing it immediately on social media. And it was really remarkable to see the swiftness of the reaction of people on social media across the country. So in the matter of minutes, basically the perpetrators have been identified. And as a rule, these are either active members of the ruling party, supporters, and it should be mentioned also quite often employed in the local public enterprises or local or central public administration, assumingly jobs given as a reward for their loyalty to the party. But what created an immense problem for the regime is the organization of the students' protest as a genuine movement with no easily identifiable leaders, where all decisions have been made through plenary deliberations. And as these protests kept receiving really wide support, both from the students, but also different wider communities, the regime tried to come up with their counter-narrative, creating these students 2.0 group, as mentioned by Jelena. And as she said, a movement spread with extremely limited success. There are probably more panelists at this event than the number of members of this group. But still, the regime pushed further. And at the moment when it was clear that the students will organize the central protest in Belgrade on the 15th of March, the regime also moved to a new phase as well, and essentially bringing those students who want to study in Pionirski Park, located just in the front of the presidency building, and also in the close vicinity of the City Hall and National Assembly. And it was evident early on that everything about this action is state organized in terms of logistics, coordination, and so on. But also when the regime realized that they cannot essentially find the regular genuine students willing to join their little tribe in Pionirski Park, they started moving in really a variety of characters. And as proven by investigative reporters, most of these people in the camp were paid to be there. So from poor and disadvantaged people over fake students to rented thugs who try to provoke people coming to see this Chelsea and a new Belgrade wonder. The number of those rented thugs really grew exponentially as the 15th of March was approaching, culminating on the very day of the protest. Some of those thugs pretended to be students. Some were given old or fake military uniforms, and they have been portrayed by the government tabloids as military veterans supporting the students who want to study. And indeed, some of those were genuine veterans, and as mentioned by Marco, some of those were the members of Special Operations Unit, the infamous armed wing of Secret Security Service, whose members were indeed convicted for the assassination of Serbian Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić back in 2003. And indeed, in the eve of the 15th of March, the number of these rent thugs in Pionersky Park amounted to hundreds. And in the entire perimeter around the park was surrounded by more than 100 tractors, brought and parked there in the middle of the night, despite the fact that it is illegal to drive agricultural vehicles in the urban surroundings. And this was also presented in the regime media as the support of farmers to this rather heterogeneous group of people in the park, although the farmers were, to be honest, nowhere to be found, nowhere to be found around. And on the very day of the biggest rally in the history of Serbia, on the 15th of March, there were a number of reports of organized group of thugs in the park, but also in a few strategic locations around the central streets of Belgrade, all masked, carrying backpacks, umbrellas, and people also reported a number of agents provocateur among the protesters. So when we combine these, these tractors, organized group of thugs, agents provocateur, this all indicates a state-sponsored action because it requires a lot of coordination with state actors. However, the student stewards, supported by their professors and others who joined them in securing the rally, really prevented a bloodshed that was in the making. Once they received the information that the group of thugs were approaching Pionersky Park from different locations, really with great coordination skills, they managed to clear out the most problematic area around the park, effectively preventing violent conflict. Well, that was avoided. Something else was in the motion. During the moment of silence in the memory of those killed in Novi Sad, killed by the systemic corruption of this regime, tens of thousands of people experienced the effects, most resembling to the use of so-called less lethal or sensory weapon. So unlike the conventional lethal weapons that are designed to inflict open wounds or death, such as firearms, these less lethal weapons range from tear gas to sound cannons, rubber bullets, you name it. And these weapons, lethal or less lethal, they all cause pain, which is a somatic sensation. But besides pain, certain types of less lethal weapons also blunt human senses. And through that, they incapacitate and repress the sensory apparatus. So these weapons are intended to inflict debility, specifically to targeting the human senses. So basically our ability to act by immobilizing, making it hard to see, hear, move, etc. So this is why we call them also the weapons of sensory repression. The literature called them the weapons of sensory repression. The Serbian legislation is very explicit in terms of what kind of less lethal or sensory weapons can be used by the police or any other actor. And the effects during the 15th of March protests cannot be caused by any of legally sanctioned sensory weapons. So immediately after the protest, the police, the military, the security service all deny the use of weapons of sensory repression, stating they do not have it in their possession, any type of such weapons or any type of sensory weapon not explicitly permitted by the law and the police. However, in the matter of days, this is proven false. In fact, the police ultimately admitted not only having imported and tested, but also installing acoustic weapons or on gendarmerie vehicles, which were used during the 15th of March protest. So despite being caught in the spiral of lies, the government still denies that any sensory weapon was used. And most recently, acting upon the request for interim measures received from civil society organizations from Serbia, the European Court of Human Rights requested Serbian government to report on the use of sonic weapons by the end of this month. So in that sense, we are yet to see how will this unfold. But one thing is for sure: if the government keeps repeating that it did not use any sonic, acoustic, or any other sensory weapon, it still has moral, legal, and political responsibility to investigate this incident in a transparent, objective, and evidence-based manner, ideally with the support of independent international experts. Thank you. Maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Luca. I'd just like to pose a very brief additional question to all of you, just to each of you, starting with you, Luca. I mean, would you say that the use of the sonic weapon was the game changer? And if you can say a sentence or two on the legal implications, long-term or mid-term legal implications. But please, all of you, try to be short so that we can open up for the Q&A. There is already one question posed by Gresa Hassa in the chat, and we want to pick up on some questions.
Thank you, Vedran. I'll keep it short. So if it is proven that the reaction of large number of tens of thousands of citizens, which we witnessed in the protest of Belgrade, was caused by any sensory weapon, we can draw several implications. First, its use is not permitted by permitted under the law on police. There was no warning prior to its use, which is also a legal obligation. Less lethal weapons can only be used against violent protesters. So not only was it not used against violent protesters, it was deployed during a moment of silence for the victims of Novi Sad. Furthermore, its use was neither necessary nor proportionate in any way, which are also legal standards for the use of this kind of less lethal weapons. Furthermore, they were directed at a massive number of people without distinguishing targets. And, looking at, more back, it is certain that the very import of this kind of sensory weapon to Serbia was unlawfully approved and unlawfully carried out. What we can also say that it's quite certain that the order of its use was most likely issued outside official security sector command channels. And indeed, due to its use and the consequences that followed, multiple serious crimes were committed, including causing of a general danger. So by permitting or enabling the use of this weapon, the regime endangered tens and hundreds of thousands of its own citizens. So this is why it is of paramount importance to conduct a comprehensive investigation and hold accountable those in charge.
Thank you so much, Luca. Marco, just quickly over to you. So the EU plays, of course, an important role in what's happening in Serbia. So far, recently, we have seen a lot of this kind of a very stabilitocratic appeasement policy towards Vučić, including the latest visit or the last visit of Ursula von der Leyen to Belgrade and all this kind of a context. Yesterday, Vučić met with Ursula von der Leyen and Costa in Brussels. What would you say is something shifting in Brussels regarding the attitude towards what's going on in Serbia, and what's the role that the EU plays? Just quickly, if you could outline one or two major changes, if there are any, and yeah.
Well, no major changes. Thus far, we've heard voices of mostly European parliamentarians, but only those belonging to the families of social democrats, lefts, liberals, and Greens, who were vocal about authoritarian tendencies in the region, while the EU maintained their diplomatic kind of language and stance towards Vučić, if not praising him for any success. Of course, this March 15 might be a turning point as well in this kind of relations. With this in mind, I'm reflecting also upon the question posed by the European Court for Human Rights to the government of Serbia about the potential use of these sonic weapons. So should these kind of things evolve into a matter that it becomes more, let's say, awkward for the European Commission to keep silent about, then they will definitely display more rigorous kind of treatment of Vučić and his regime. Maybe this is something that has happened yesterday behind the closed door, but we don't know much about it because the fact is, and the problem is, these meetings are happening behind the closed doors, and we call upon each time, us within the BPAG or us as experts, we call upon the EU to be more vocal, to actually call spade a spade, and to go publicly with their talks with Vučić and others.
Thank you so much, Marco. Jelena Lonča, a quick question to you. As we see, of course, the repression is increasing as we speak on the schools or in universities. Do you hear or do you know how universities and students and schools are going to adjust their strategies and how they want to move forward? So what would be your prediction if the pressure increases even more than it is right now? So what will be a kind of an end game or the next few steps from protesters, students, universities?
I think it differs for the schools and the faculties and the universities, because the teachers do not only face repression, state repression, but also face the fact that pupils and students have lost so much from their education, and that for them this is harder, very, very important to go to school, particularly for the primary schools. So in that sense, I think this is their primary worry, and some of them and also the fact that they don't receive salaries is one of the challenging issues. So for some of them, probably we can expect the return to the normal teaching, so 45 minutes classes, while at the same time participating in all the protests and street blockades. Some others continue and do not expect to stop with the protests or strikes anytime soon. I think many of these decisions are very individual. Many of them are made in the board meetings in schools, and these majorities change. Sometimes some schools return to 45 minutes or full-time classes, but then go back to strike when things change, depending on how things change. When the repression increases, more teachers are willing to participate in strikes, I'd say. For the universities, I don't expect that this would change regardless of state repression. The universities strongly support student demands and student blockades as well. And I'd say that there is a strong agreement among faculties, all faculties, that they will continue with the protests and continue with the support until the student demands are met. I would say that this will not change anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Jelena. Over to Jelena, Claude. One specific question. I mean, we see the use of this narrative of call for revolution. Someone from outside is trying to topple down the regime, foreign agents, etc., which is very much, I mean, if you look more closely into it, a kind of a copy paste of the Russian disinformation propaganda that is used by Kremlin, but also in some other states that are close to Russia. Jelena, my question would be, looking at this kind of a geopolitical kind of a play when it comes to the narratives, how much is Serbia here relying on Russian support in producing these types of narratives, and how would you see Russian role? Is it overestimated? Because sometimes in the West, many see direct link, and many experts are more cautious. How would you see it and frame it if you have a sense?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm always trying to balance the answer to that question, because we are obviously aware of disinformation campaigns that are being implemented in different European countries, especially during the election periods. I'm hesitant here because you obviously have a lot of echo of Russian narratives, but it's the question who are the originators and propagators of this narrative, because more often than you would suspect, it would be government representatives and not the hidden parts of online world influencers and similar who would be propagating this narrative. So I think that this idea of how far these narratives from Moscow is being spread is hard to assess, because there are very lenient companions already present in the government and close to the ruling party who can do the job themselves. So there is no necessarily something that you would define as foreign influence in a strict sense of the word. And just to add one thing, that in relation to this kind of East-West division, students were also smart not to be played around it. So they are trying to stay geopolitically as much as neutral as they can. This is not always possible, but they are not sending neither strong pro-Russian and even less pro-European messages. So this kind of makes it harder to bring them into these narratives.
Thank you so much. Before we open up, and there are several questions in the chat, and you will see them. Let's see how much we can cover in the next, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes that we have left. I will just, because Florian Bieber, dear colleague of us and director of the Center for Southeast European Studies in Graz, was mentioned in one of the questions, but I would also like to welcome you, Florian, to the round. So you also were present on March 15th in Belgrade. And if you could, I would like to ask you something. I mean, all of us all the time think about or pose this question: what is going to be the next political step? What's the political end game? What's the role that the Serbian opposition can play? How would you, because you've worked a lot on this kind of a political dynamic in Serbia, how would you see actually this kind of a political next step playing out in the course of the next few weeks, months?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question and also the contribution so far, which I really enjoyed. And I mean, I would say that's really the biggest challenge of how to translate the protests. And I think nobody has an answer. Translate the protests into political transformation in the country. I think one seems to be quite clear there is a limited time window. I mean, I think the protests have been sustained for an extraordinarily long period of time, but there's probably an end date, which is the summer. It's very hard to sustain university closures and all of that over the summer. I mean, I might be proven wrong, but I think probably the protest organizers might realize that a decision time is coming up, and I'm very curious what the strategies will be, because clearly numbers are not enough. I mean, having 300,000 people on the street can hardly be beaten in terms of numbers. So I don't think the government will react differently if there are 400,000 people on the streets of Belgrade. So I think other strategies are needed. And a political path seems to be very clear, because otherwise I think the government seems to opt for repression, certainly not in any way acknowledging the demands and fulfilling them. So it doesn't seem to work with the government. So what is the way out? I mean, I think, as already has been mentioned by some opposition parties, having a transitional government, which Vučić himself says he would only accept if he, never accept only if he's dead, which of course is a very typical kind of melodrama of the president. But some political process, because early elections, which Vučić has threatened, seems to be actually unlikely now, because he might not win them. And he will only organize elections he can win. So pushing for a process which is a transitional government, which creates free and fair media environment, cleans up election lists, and prepares for elections, like what we had in Macedonia a decade ago under EU auspices and with EU support, is, in my view, the most productive way out of it. I don't say it's very easy to get there, but I think that's something where the EU's silence, of course, is not helping, because the EU could push in that direction. It's done it before. Had a PRIBA mission, a rule of law mission. It's done all of those things. It has it in the methodology for enlargement. All of the countries, including Serbia, committed themselves that they have to accept such a mission. So it actually could really do quite a bit, but its silence is unfortunately deafening. But I think this is the direction to go into. The question is whether the students will be able to, set up maybe demands or find a way to communicate with the opposition without becoming, in a certain way too close. But, let's remember Otpor 2.5 decades ago was also saying we're not running in elections, but instead we're pushing the parties of the opposition together. We're setting demands on them. We're setting a framework in which they operate. I'm not saying where this is the same as Otpor, but there are certain lessons to be learned from past movements, how to be not a political party or actor, but push political parties to be responsible and offer a path out of the crisis.
Well, thanks a lot. Just a very quick follow-up one. I mean, there is a person that is nowadays mentioned daily several thousands and millions of times in international relations and globally. That's President Donald Trump. We haven't mentioned Donald Trump a single time. But what will be your quick take on the position of the White House and the new U.S. administration on Vučić and the protests? We see that there is a certain or level of support for Erdogan in Turkey. So how do you see it here playing out beyond Donald Trump Jr. visiting Vučić in Belgrade?
I mean, I was hoping we could have a conversation without Trump, the Trump and the elephant in the room, so to speak, but we can't. No, I mean, I think honestly said, I mean, they're the business interests. I mean, the Trump Tower, where you can look the website of the wonderful building they're planning to construct on the Generalstab. You know, suggests that there's a business interest in Serbia, less of a political interest, but one which is linked to Vučić. I mean, none of that will continue if Vučić was no longer in power. I don't think you're going to get a Trump Tower, Generalstab, you know, building set up. So from that point of view, we haven't seen the political messaging, and the messaging has been very quiet. Also, if we're looking at, you know, crisis in Bosnia. So Trump has not yet rediscovered the Balkans on the map, but that's not, I think, something to be relaxed about, because the business interests are, in the end of the day, one of the prime drivers of Trump and his administration. So I think if Vučić would get into really tough spot, he might look to America for support. How much the US can do concretely is probably limited at the end of the day, but I wouldn't discount the probability of Trump, you know, kind of being used by Vučić. I mean, after all, this is what Vučić has been very good at, in trying to play international partners for his own advantage.
Thank you so much. Now I see that the questions in the chat I mean, we got at least 10, 15 interesting questions. I don't think that we can answer them all, but I think we can pick up on some of them. And I would suggest the following, as we have, let's say, 15 more minutes, to just start again the round. So starting with Marko and going to Jelena and finishing with Luka. And you just pick and choose one or two particular aspects that you see very interesting. I mean, Marko, there was a specific question addressed to you. There are one or two questions addressed to all. There are questions, I mean, around Rio Tinto and all possible questions in the chat. You see them all, but I would suggest you pick and choose one or maximum two aspects and try to quickly answer them. Marko.
Sure. Well, the Andriana's question was just picked up by Florian mostly. So that is what I'm talking about. The outside actors, of course, I do mean the European Union. I'm not counting on any meaningful support coming from the US or Russia. Although you know, to be quite fair, Russia does have a role, and it is quite a surprising one. Russia is, and Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for Kremlin, for example, refused to acknowledge student protest as the colorful revolution. I think they're also trying to exert some pressure on Vučić here, and maybe take some strategic gains from this as well. But of course, positive kind of role from the EU is what is missing, and some repetition of what has been done in Macedonia in 2015 is, for me, the desired scenario in which I would like to see EU going forward. I can pick maybe some others, for example, the role of Rio Tinto as regards to silence from the EU, absolutely. Maybe not the EU itself, but of course some very important EU member states, most notably Germany. I believe that this transactional politics plays much part of this realpolitik, as it has been framed by Chancellor Merkel and is still conducted by the European Commission today. So we have Vučić dealing with France, doing military plane deals, lithium mining with Germans, etc., etc. Of course, that is all part of his pot, to which he adds up this momentum of being guarantor of stability for the crisis that he is producing himself, be it Kosovo, be it Republika Srpska. etc., etc. So basically, this is his card. This is the game in which he feels comfortable, and this is the game which leads outside partners to keep at least one eye closed to democratic deficiencies in the region. Hopefully, this will not persist.
Thank you, Marko. Jelena, Claude.
I will just pick some of them that are more related to kind of symbolic aspects and the aspects related to the students and partly about the safety. I think that, as Luca explained, students are doing a great job in increasing their own safety and avoiding conflict. Overall, the level of kind of digital hygiene has been really on the rise in Serbia following all these measures, and then there is also huge solidarity with students, and different groups of society are at their disposal for safety reasons. So, for example, after 28th attack on students in Novi Sad, one taxi company offered their support. So as long the moment a student is being attacked, they can call a taxi, and then a whole bunch of them would come to protect them. So there are different measures, and I think it's really one of the key questions also addressed by previous speakers is where do we go next? Because obviously, as one of the questions is rightly to point out that students are seen as saviors, but they're also seen at the center of legitimate, seen as the only legitimate opponent to the current regimes, with symbolically also minimizing the other actors, oppositional political parties, non-governmental organizations, pretty much all kind of already existing politically active agents in a society. So I think that the narrative, even though students are calling for citizens' assemblies, and even though many of those assemblies are indeed taking place and also addressing a broad range of topics and not only expressing solidarity to students, I think that the narrative in kind of this very political sense is what will the students do? What will the students suggest? And this, will also, I think, affect how it will downplay at the end.
Thank you so much. Jelena, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think what we're witnessing now is still a slow process. I don't see a quick ending. And I think that even the students want it to be slow because it helps broader and more systematic transformation, which is probably needed. What students are mostly scared of is a quick shift of change of government without any deeper systemic change in the society. And I think many of them also worry in a way of how to ensure that the new government does not do the same things, is not as corrupted as the current one. How do we prevent the same thing repeating again? And I think this is probably why they have recently kept inviting other parts of the society to join the protest and trying to say, although they remain the main actor of the protest clearly, and as someone mentioned, most of the public does see them as saviors. They keep saying we cannot do this alone, others have to join. And I think these citizen assemblies are an effort to broaden participation and responsibility for the society we are now trying to shape. We haven't spoken much about these assemblies. I think they're very important. They're very important because many citizens in Serbia, when we talk about the public and the citizens, we mostly frame them as very passive, apathic, not interested in politics. Politics is a very bad word in Serbia. political parties in civil society have a very bad reputation, and you don't even like to say that you are interested in politics or care about politics, and certainly do not want to participate in politics, because this is perceived as something really bad. And everyone who cares about politics is probably corrupted. And that's part of the narrative that the government was very successful in. And these assemblies, I think, are first trying to, and I think are successful in this, that people are finally interested in public issues. And they not only want to watch them from a side, but also care about participating in decision-making in the issues that are related to their local communities. So the political is coming to the forefront, and I think this is important, major change. And we want citizens who are politically active, who do not necessarily have to be members of political parties running the elections, but certainly who are capable and willing to keep those in power responsible. And I think this is the change that we are hopefully now witnessing. And this is the one that could also lead then to more political transformation and changes, with the people more willing then and realizing the importance of also political parties. I don't think the majority of society is now interested in the elections, while the support for the ruling political parties is decreasing. We don't see the increase in the support for the opposition parties. And that's also one of the major challenges. The students themselves, as well as one of the main actors in current political situations, are against any transitional governments. At least that's an official narrative. While they certainly discuss these issues among themselves, we haven't really seen them stating, okay, we want to enter this conversation publicly. We think that this is a good solution. We haven't seen this so far. And probably no one really knows how to get there, as Florian said. So I think this makes me think, at least, that this will take some time and last for a while. And when it comes to the closure date or whatever it has to end, we thought so. The holidays will come. There will be New Year's, whatever, Christmas, and so on. It didn't really end then. So we never know. We all hope that this will be fast, but we cannot be certain that this will be.
Great, Jelena, you are joining the club of hopeless positivists and optimists like Marko. Great. Luka, your turn for a quick
Well, I'll just build on what Jelena said in terms of, and as Svetlana just mentioned in the chat. So we are currently, within the 30 days deadline for the either restructuring and reconstructing the current government, or the government which has to be elected with the current National Assembly, or we're going to head up to early elections. What is clear, what public polls are showing, that the support to Vučić is declining, but we have to keep in mind that his starting position is very, very high. And the other problem is, as already mentioned, is that these votes which maybe Vučić is losing are not easily translated to the political opposition. So to that point, there is still a lot of ambiguities. The other part of the challenge is that the part of the students' success in attracting such a wide support of the citizenry was, they're distancing from party politics, from partisan issue. But now now that we are in the moment where we either have new elections or strong push from different parts of society to have either expert technocratic government, this definitely translates into a more current problems. What we also see with the local assemblies is that people are really freed in this with these protests, and they're demanding actually more power in their own hands. And I do believe that this have to be reflected in some future constitutional changes also, and the changes in terms of the more direct democracy when it is possible, and when it is a more efficient, but also changes to different laws in order really to reflect those now growing citizens' demands.
Thank you so much, Luca. In the meantime, a few more questions came in, but I think it's 7:25. It's
Gazella has
time to
answered many.
So Jelena, sorry, what did you
I'm
say?
saying Gazella answered many of the questions. So
Yes,
thank you.
Gazella is answering all the questions, and that's perfect. I just wanted to conclude and to say, I mean, what is very unique, and what I also take while observing the protest, actually, that the students are refusing to play politics by the existing rules. They are demanding a radical change, and I think this kind of reclaiming politics and the political, as Jelena argued, I think that's very fundamental, and bringing in the notion of solidarity, the notion of passion, the notion of assemblies, participatory democracy, of course, but also the notion of love in a certain way. So they display this kind of love in a political concept. So I think this is very important. At the same time, we have the regime playing regime politics by new, more repressive rules, and that is actually telling us that there will be no quick ending, but we can take in any case right now, also not on going beyond or looking beyond Serbia. I think the students in Serbia and the protests have managed to inspire many, from Slovakia to Hungary, now to some colleagues on the streets of Istanbul and Ankara. Many took notice of what's going on here. So I think it's also telling the story that change is possible in times where change sometimes seems impossible. So I think there's a long way to go. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Please take all the details, all the facts that you got here, take it to your universities, inform the public, inform the journalists. I think we need to keep a very close look on what's happening, both in Serbia, but also in Turkey and in many other countries. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening, and thanks again for the center in Graz. I also want to mention the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory. Luca, thank you for your participation. Thank you all. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.